The air felt thick, like the world was holding its breath. As I lay next to him, our shoulders inches apart, the creak of the old mattress betraying every shift. My heart pounded so loud I swore he could hear it. But Ethan, my best friend since we were kids, just stared at the ceiling, oblivious to the storm raging inside me. I was in love with him, had been for years, and tonight, in this cramped Brooklyn apartment, I was sharing a bed with the one person I could never have. We'd ended up here by accident, or so I told myself. It was late summer in New York, the kind of sticky heat that made you feel like you were swimming through the air. Ethan, 23, with his broad shoulders and easy grin, had driven up from Philly to crash at my place for a weekend music festival. My tiny studio apartment, barely big enough for me, had one bed, and neither of us had thought much of it when he threw his duffel bag down and said, "We'll make it work, Nate." But now, lying here, the weight of those words pressed against my chest like a stone. I was Nathan, also 23, the quiet one who'd always been better at listening than speaking. Growing up in the suburbs of Jersey, Ethan and I had been inseparable, two kids who'd bonded over skateboards, late-night video games, and dreams of escaping our small town. He was the golden boy, the one who could charm anyone with a laugh, while I was the shadow, always a step behind, hiding the truth. I was gay, and every time he slung an arm around me or called me brother, it felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Tonight, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the way his knee brushed mine when he climbed into bed, or the way he didn't pull away when our elbows touched. Maybe it was the half-empty bottle of whiskey we'd shared, laughing about old times until the conversation turned quiet, heavy with things unsaid. "You ever think about how we ended up here?" he'd asked, his voice low, almost lost in the hum of the city outside. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because all I could think about was how close he was, how his breath warmed the air between us, and how I'd spent years building walls to keep this feeling locked away. The festival had been a blur: crowds, neon lights, and music so loud it drowned out the ache in my chest. Ethan had been his usual self, flirting with girls, tossing back beers, pulling me into the chaos with that infectious energy of his. But there were moments, fleeting, dangerous moments, when his eyes lingered on me a little too long, or his hand rested on my shoulder a beat past friendly. I told myself I was imagining it. Ethan was straight. He'd dated half the girls in our high school, bragged about his hookups in college. But those moments kept creeping in, like cracks in a dam I'd built to hold back hope. Now, in the dark, I could feel him breathing, steady and slow, like he was asleep. But I wasn't. I couldn't be. Every nerve in my body was alive, hyper-aware of the inches between us. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, trying to focus on anything but the warmth of his arm so close to mine. Then he moved. Just a fraction, a shift of his body, and suddenly his shoulder pressed against me, solid and warm. My breath caught, and I froze, terrified he'd wake up, terrified he wouldn't. Was he asleep? Or was he testing something? "Nate," he whispered, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. My heart stopped. I turned my head, just enough to see his face in the dim light. His eyes were open, staring at me, and there was something in them I'd never seen before, something raw, uncertain, like he was standing on the edge of a cliff. "You awake?" he asked, his voice barely above a breath. "Yeah," I managed, my throat dry. I wanted to say more, to ask what was happening, but the words wouldn't come. He didn't move away. Instead, he shifted closer, so close I could feel the heat of his skin through his t-shirt. My pulse raced, a deafening drum in my ears. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. Ethan was straight. Ethan was safe. But the way he looked at me now, his blue eyes searching mine, felt like a question neither of us was ready to answer. The city hummed outside, horns and sirens weaving through the night. But in here, it was just us. Just this moment. And I couldn't breathe. I lay there, rigid, as Ethan's gaze held mine, his eyes flickering with something I couldn't name: fear, maybe, or curiosity, or something deeper that scared me more than anything. The space between us felt like a live wire, charged and dangerous, and I was terrified of what might happen if I moved, if I spoke, if I let myself believe this was real. "Ethan," I whispered, my voice cracking. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he'd laugh it off, roll over, and pretend this never happened. But he didn't. Instead, he reached out, his hand brushing my arm, tentative, like he was testing the waters of something he didn't understand. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice rough. I don't know, Nate." My heart was a runaway train, crashing through every wall I'd built to protect myself. Ethan wasn't supposed to do this. He wasn't supposed to look at me like I was more than his best friend, more than the guy who'd always been there, steady and safe. But here he was, his fingers lingering on my skin, and I couldn't tell if this was a dream or a nightmare. We'd been through so much together. High school fights, sneaking beers from his dad's garage, the summer we drove to the Jersey Shore and slept on the beach because we couldn't afford a motel. Ethan was the one who'd pulled me out of my shell, who'd made me feel like I belonged somewhere. But I'd always known there was a line I could never cross. I'd come out to him 2 years ago, sitting on the hood of his beat-up Chevy, my hands shaking as I told him I was gay. He just nodded, punched my shoulder, and said, "Cool, man. Doesn't change a thing." And it hadn't, at least. Not for him. For me. It was the moment I realized I'd have to love him in silence forever. But now, that silence was breaking. "Do you ever," he started, then stopped, his hand pulling back like he'd been burned. He sat up, running a hand through his blonde hair, the moonlight catching the tension in his shoulders. "Forget it," he muttered, but his voice was unsteady, and he didn't lie back down. I sat up too, my chest tight. "Ethan, talk to me," I said, hating how desperate I sounded. "What's going on?" I wanted to reach for him, to pull him back, but I was afraid of what it would mean, afraid of losing him if I pushed too hard. He turned to me, his eyes shadowed. "I don't know how to say this," he said, his voice low, almost angry. "I've been thinking about you. A lot. More than I should." My breath caught, and the room seemed to shrink around us. I'm not like you, Nate. I've never, but when I'm with you, it's different. It's always been different." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. His words were a grenade, and I was waiting for the explosion. Was he saying what I thought he was saying? Or was this just the whiskey talking? The late hour, the claustrophobia of this tiny room. I wanted to believe it, wanted it so badly it hurt. But I'd spent years convincing myself this could never happen. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "you don't have to say anything you're not sure of." I was trying to protect him, protect myself, but every word felt like a betrayal of the hope clawing its way up inside me. He shook his head, his jaw tight. "That's the thing. I'm not sure. But I'm not sure either." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear I'd carried for years. "I don't know what this is, Nate, but I know I don't want to lose you." The words hit me like a punch. I wanted to tell him everything, how I'd loved him since we were 16, how every laugh, every touch, had been a quiet agony. But I didn't. Instead, I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched his shoulder. He didn't pull away. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of years between us, the air thick with possibility and dread. Then he leaned in, slow, like he was moving through water, and his forehead rested against mine. My heart stopped. I could feel his breath, warm and uneven, and I wanted to close the distance, to kiss him, to let go of the fear that had held me back for so long. But I didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about Might, was about him. About us. And whatever this was, it was fragile, like a spark that could either light a fire or burn out. The moment stretched, endless and fragile, as Ethan's forehead pressed against mine, his breath mingling with my own in the quiet of the night. I wanted to freeze time, to hold on to this impossible closeness. But my mind was screaming, warning me that this could ruin everything. What if he regretted this tomorrow? What if I did? I pulled back, just enough to see his face, my hand still on his shoulder. His eyes were wide, searching, like he was as lost as I was. Ethan, I said, my voice shaking, are you sure about this? I hated asking, hated the way it broke the spell, but I needed to know. I couldn't survive losing him. Not after this. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked down, his hands clenching the edge of the mattress. I don't know what I'm sure of, he admitted, his voice raw. But I know I've been thinking about you, about us for months. Maybe longer. I tried to ignore it. Nate. I tried to be normal. But it's you. It's always been you. His words were a blade, cutting through every defense I'd built. I wanted to believe him, wanted to let myself fall into this moment. But the fear was a living thing, clawing at my chest. You're straight, I said, the words bitter in my mouth. You've always been straight. What changed? He flinched, like I'd hit him, but he didn't look away. I don't know if I'm straight, he said, each word deliberate, like he was carving them out of himself. I've been with girls. Yeah, but it's never felt right. Not like this. He gestured between us, his hand shaking. When I'm with you, I feel like I can breathe. Like I'm not pretending. My heart was a mess. Hope and terror crashing together. I wanted to tell him I loved him, that I'd loved him for years. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said, you don't have to figure it all out tonight. We don't have to do anything. But he shook his head, his eyes fierce. I don't want to keep running from this, he said. I'm tired of running. And then, before I could process it, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, like he was afraid I'd pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. I kissed him back, my hands finding his face, and the world fell away. It was just us, just this moment, and it was everything I'd ever wanted and everything I'd been afraid of. His lips were warm, uncertain but urgent, and I felt like I was drowning in him, in the years of longing I'd buried. When we pulled apart, we were both breathing hard, foreheads pressed together again. Nate, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm scared. Me too, I admitted, my voice barely audible. But I'm here. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. We lay back down, closer now, his arm draped over my waist, my head resting against his shoulder. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't an answer. But it was a start. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The next morning, the sunlight streamed through the window, harsh and unforgiving. Ethan was already up, sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to me. My stomach twisted. Was this it? The moment he'd pull away, pretend last night never happened. I sat up, my mouth dry, and said, "Hey." He turned, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he said back, his voice quiet. Then, after a beat, he smiled a small, hesitant smile that made my chest ache. "Last night was real, right?" I nodded, my throat tight. "Yeah, it was real." He exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath. "Good. Because I don't want to take it back." We didn't talk about it much that day. The festival was still going, and we threw ourselves into the chaos of it: music, crowds, the smell of fried food and sweat. But something had shifted. His hand brushed mine as we walked, and he didn't pull away. He laughed a little louder, stood a little closer, and every time our eyes met, there was a spark, a silent promise that this wasn't over. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. Ethan was grappling with something bigger than us, something that could change everything. And I was terrified of what this meant for him, for me, for the friendship we'd built over a decade. But for now, I let myself hold onto the hope, fragile as it was, that maybe, just maybe, we could find a way through this together. The festival's final day was a blur of heat and sound, but all I could focus on was Ethan's laugh, his glances, the way his hand lingered when he passed me a drink. We were dancing on the edge of something new, something terrifying, and every moment felt like a step toward or away from it. By the time we stumbled back to my apartment, exhausted and buzzing, I was sure the spell would break, that he'd retreat into the safety of who he'd always been. But he didn't. We collapsed onto the bed, still in our sweaty clothes, and he turned to me, his eyes soft in the dim light. "Nate," he said, his voice low. "I meant what I said last night. I'm not running." I wanted to believe him, but doubt was a shadow I couldn't shake. "Ethan, this is big," I said, sitting up, my hands twisting in my lap. "You're figuring yourself out, and that's okay. But I don't want you to feel like you have to." I stopped, searching for the right words. "I don't want you to do this just because you think it's what I want." He sat up too, his expression fierce. "This isn't about what you want," he said, his voice sharp. "This is about me, about what I feel when I'm with you. I've spent years telling myself it was nothing, that it was just us being close. But it's more than that, Nate. And I'm done pretending it's not." His words hit me like a wave, pulling me under. I wanted to kiss him again, to lose myself in the possibility of us. But the fear was still there, whispering that this could break us both. "What happens when you go back to Philly?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What happens when you're not here? When it's just you and your life, and all of this?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I don't want to go back to how things were. Not after this." We didn't kiss again that night. Instead, we talked for the first time in years. He told me about the doubts he'd buried, the moments he'd questioned himself but pushed it aside. He told me about the girls he'd dated, how it never felt right, how he'd always compared them to me. I told him about the years I'd spent hiding my feelings, the nights I'd lain awake wondering what it would be like to tell him the truth. It was raw, messy, and terrifying, but it was honest. The next morning, Ethan had to leave. His job a mechanic at a garage in Philly wouldn't wait, and I had my own life to get back to, working freelance graphic design from my cramped apartment. We stood by his truck, the city waking up around us, and I felt like I was losing something I'd only just found. "I'll call you," he said, his hand on my shoulder, his eyes steady. "This isn't over, Nate." I nodded, but the doubt lingered. "Just be honest with yourself," I said. "Whatever happens, I'll be here." He hugged me then, tight and fierce. and I held on like it was the last time. When he drove away, I stood on the sidewalk, watching his truck disappear into the Brooklyn traffic, my heart a tangled mess of hope and fear. The next few weeks were torture. Ethan called, texted, sent me stupid memes like he always had. But there was a new weight to it all. Every message felt like a lifeline, every silence a chasm. I threw myself into work, sketching logos and editing photos until my eyes burned. But he was always there, in the back of my mind. I wondered if he was talking to anyone, if he was questioning everything again, if he was pulling away. Then, one night, he called. "Nate," he said, his voice urgent. "I need to see you. Can I come up this weekend?" My heart leapt, but I kept my voice steady. "Yeah, of course. What's going on?" I need to figure this out," he said. "With you." When he showed up that Friday, he looked different, tired, but determined. We didn't go to the festival this time. Instead, we walked the city, from the Brooklyn Bridge to a quiet diner in Williamsburg, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his family, how his dad would never understand, how he wasn't sure he could tell anyone yet. I told him about my own coming out, the fear and the freedom, and how it had changed me. By the time we got back to my apartment, the air was thick with unspoken questions. We sat on the bed, closer than we needed to be, and I felt the same pull as that first night. But this time, I was the one who leaned in, kissing him with a certainty I hadn't felt before. He kissed me back, his hand steady, and for the first time, I let myself believe this could be real. Kissing Ethan felt like coming home and stepping into the unknown all at once. His hands were steady, grounding me, but there was a hunger in the way he pulled me closer, like he was afraid I'd slip away. When we finally broke apart, breathless, he looked at me with a mix of wonder and fear, and I knew we were both standing on the edge of something we couldn't take back. "Nate," he said, his voice rough, "I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I want this. I want you." Those words were everything I dreamed of hearing, but they came with a weight I hadn't expected. Ethan wasn't just my best friend anymore, was a man wrestling with his identity, with a world that wouldn't make this easy for him. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from the pain I'd been through, but I knew I couldn't. All I could do was be there, steady and sure, as he found his way. We spent that weekend wrapped in each other, stealing moments between the chaos of the city. We walked through Central Park, our hands brushing but not quite holding, afraid of who might see. We laughed over cheap pizza, shared quiet moments on my fire escape, watching the city glow below us. It was perfect, but it was fragile, and I knew it couldn't last like this, not with him in Philly, me in Brooklyn, and a world of expectations pulling us apart. On Sunday night, as he packed his bag, the air felt heavy again. "What happens now?" I asked, sitting on the bed, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. He paused, his hand still on his duffel. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I need time, Nate, to figure out what this means for me. For us." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "But I'm not going anywhere. I promise." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Take all the time you need," I said. "I'll wait." He left that night, and the silence in my apartment was deafening. The weeks that followed were a strange dance of hope and uncertainty. Ethan called every few days, his voice warm but guarded, like he was still piecing himself together. I tried to give him space, but every day without him felt like a test of my patience, my faith, my heart. Then, one evening, I got a text. I told my sister. My heart stopped. Ethan's sister, Claire, was his closest confidant, a fiercely protective 25-year-old who'd always been kind to me. I called him immediately. "What happened?" I asked, my voice tight. "She was surprised," he said, his tone a mix of relief and nerves. "But she listened. She said she just wants me to be happy." He paused, then added, "She asked about you. Said she always knew you were special to me." I laughed, a shaky sound. "Claire's always been smarter than you." He chuckled, but there was an edge to it. "I'm scared, Nate. My dad, he's not like Claire. He's old school. If I tell him, it could be bad." "You don't have to tell him yet," I said, my heart aching for him. "You don't have to do anything you're not ready for." "But I want to," he said, his voice fierce. "I want to be honest. I want to be with you, not hide it." Those words carried me through the next few weeks, but they also terrified me. Ethan was diving into something he didn't fully understand, and I knew the world could be cruel to people like us. I'd faced it whispers in high school, a cousin who stopped talking to me after I came out. But Ethan was new to this, and I didn't know if he was ready for what might come. He came back to Brooklyn a month later, and this time, there was no hesitation. He kissed me the moment he walked through the door, his hands framing my face like I was something precious. We spent the weekend lost in each other, but there was a new urgency to it, like he was trying to outrun his doubts. On Saturday night, as we lay tangled in the sheets, he said, "I'm going to tell my dad. Next week. I need to do this." My stomach dropped. "Ethan, are you sure?" I asked, sitting up. "You don't have to rush this." "I'm not rushing," he said, his eyes steady. "I'm ready. Or as ready as I'll ever be." I wanted to believe him, but fear gnawed at me. I knew what it was like to face a parent's judgment, and I didn't want him to go through that alone. But he was determined, and all I could do was hold his hand and hope. Ethan's decision to tell his dad hung over us like a storm cloud, dark and heavy with the promise of chaos. I wanted to be strong for him, to be the anchor he'd always been for me. But the thought of him facing his father's judgment made my chest tight. I knew too well how a single conversation could shatter everything. The night before he left for Philly, we sat on my couch, his head resting on my shoulder. "What if he hates me?" Ethan asked, his voice so quiet it barely reached me. "He won't hate you," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "He might not understand, but he loves you. That's what matters." Ethan nodded, but his eyes were distant, lost in a future I couldn't see. I pulled him closer, wishing I could shield him from what was coming, but knowing this was his fight. All I could do was be there when it was over. He left the next morning, promising to call after he talked to his dad. The wait was agony. I paced my apartment, checking my phone every 5 minutes, jumping at every notification. When it finally rang, late that night, I answered before the first ring ended. "Ethan." His voice was raw, like he'd been crying. "It didn't go well," he said, and my heart sank. He didn't yell, but he just looked at me like I was a stranger. Said he needed time to process it. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. "I'm so sorry," I said. "Do you want me to come down there?" "No," he said quickly. "I need to deal with this. Claire's here. She's got my back." He paused, then added, "I told him about you." My breath caught. What did he say? "Nothing good," Ethan admitted. "He thinks it's a phase. That you're confusing me." He laughed, a bitter sound. Like I haven't been confused my whole damn life. I wanted to tell him it would be okay, that his dad would come around, but I knew better than to make promises I couldn't keep. Instead, I said, "You're not confused. You're figuring it out. And I'm here, no matter what. He was quiet for a long moment, then said, I love you, Nate. The words hit me like a tidal wave, stealing my breath. I'd dreamed of hearing them, but not like this. Not with so much pain in his voice. I love you too, I said, my voice breaking. Always have. We stayed on the phone for hours, talking about nothing and everything, until he fell asleep, his breathing soft and steady through the line. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The weight of his words, his pain, was too much. The next few weeks were a blur. Ethan's dad didn't call, didn't reach out, and Ethan threw himself into work, fixing cars and avoiding home. Claire kept me updated, texting me about how he was holding up, but I could tell he was struggling. I wanted to go to him, to hold him, but he asked for space, and I gave it, even though it killed me. Then, one night, he showed up at my door, unannounced, his eyes red and his hands shaking. I couldn't stay there, he said, stepping inside. I needed to see you. I pulled him into a hug, holding him as tight as I could. What happened? I asked, my voice muffled against his shoulder. He said he can't look at me the same. Ethan said, his voice breaking. He said I'm not his son anymore. My heart shattered. I wanted to scream, to drive to Philly and shake sense into his dad. But all I could do was hold Ethan as he cried, his body shaking against mine. You're enough, I whispered. You're more than enough. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the world outside forgotten. Eventually, he pulled back, his eyes searching mine. I don't know how to do this, he said, but I know I want to do it with you. I kissed him then, soft and slow, pouring everything I felt into it: love, pain, hope. He kissed me back, and for a moment, it was just us, unbreakable despite the world's weight. The next morning, we made a plan. Ethan would stay in Brooklyn for a while, crashing with me while he looked for work. It wasn't perfect. My apartment was too small, my bank account too thin, but it was a start. We were choosing each other, choosing this, even if it meant facing a world that wasn't ready for us. Ethan moved in, and my tiny apartment became our world, a cramped, messy sanctuary where we could be ourselves, even if just for a while. The first few days were tentative, like we were learning each other all over again. But every night, we fell into bed together, his arms around me, and it felt like we were building something real, something worth fighting for. He found work at a garage in Queens, fixing cars and coming home smelling of oil and metal. I'd tease him about it, and he'd laugh, pulling me into a hug despite my protests. Those moments, simple, domestic, were everything I'd never dared to dream of. But the shadow of his dad's rejection lingered, a wound that hadn't healed. One night, as we sat on the fire escape, sharing a beer and watching the city lights, he said, I keep thinking about what I could have done differently, if I just stayed quiet. I took his hand, my thumb brushing over his knuckles. You were honest, I said. That's not something to regret. You're living your truth, Ethan. That's more than most people can say. He looked at me, his eyes soft but heavy. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, he admitted. Not like you. You are, I said, my voice firm. You're here, aren't you? You're fighting for this for us. That's strength. He kissed me then, slow and deep, and I felt the weight of his fear, his hope, his love. We were in this together, but I knew it wouldn't be easy. The world wasn't kind to people like us, and Ethan was still learning what it meant to live openly, to carry that weight. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a rhythm. He'd come home from the garage, I'd be hunched over my laptop, and we'd cook dinner together, laughing over burnt pasta or arguing about who got to pick the movie. But there were hard days too, days when he'd get a text from Claire saying his dad still wouldn't talk. Days when I'd catch him staring out the window, lost in thought. One evening, we went to a queer bar in the village, a place I'd been to a few times, but never with him. I was nervous, watching his face as we stepped inside. The music loud, the crowd vibrant. He looked overwhelmed at first, but then he took my hand, his grip firm, and I saw something shift in him, a spark of defiance, of pride. We danced that night, awkward at first, then freer, his hands on my waist, my head against his chest. For the first time, I saw him let go, let himself be seen. A guy at the bar bought us drinks, grinning as he said, "You two look good together." Ethan blushed, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he squeezed my hand and said, "Yeah, we do." But the world outside wasn't as kind. A week later, we were walking home from the subway, holding hands, when a group of guys shouted slurs from across the street. Ethan tensed, his grip tightening, and I felt the old fear creep in. "Ignore them," I whispered, pulling him along. But I could see the anger in his eyes, the hurt. When we got home, he was quiet, sitting on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands. "Is it always like this?" he asked, his voice low. "This hate?" "Sometimes," I said honestly, sitting beside him. "But it's not all there is. There's us. There's Claire. There's every person who looks at you and sees someone worth loving." He looked at me, his eyes wet. "I don't know how you do it," he said. "How you keep going." "Because I have to," I said. "And now, so do you. But you're not alone." He pulled me close, and we held each other, the world outside fading away. We were learning, slowly, how to navigate this, how to love each other in a world that didn't always love us back. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Months passed, and our life together took shape, rough edges and all. Ethan's dad still hadn't come around, but Claire visited often, bringing stories and laughter that filled the apartment with warmth. We were building something, not just a relationship, but a homey, a place where we could be ourselves, flaws and all. One spring evening, Ethan came home with a small, nervous smile. "I got a call today," he said, sitting on the couch beside me. "From my dad." My heart skipped. "What did he say?" "He wants to talk," Ethan said, his voice cautious but hopeful. "He's been going to this group, for parents, trying to understand. He asked if we could meet." I reached for his hand, my chest tight. "That's huge. Ethan, are you okay with it?" He nodded, though his eyes were uncertain. "I think so. I want him in my life, Nate. But I need him to accept us." The meeting was set for a coffee shop in Philly, neutral ground. I went with him, waiting outside, my stomach in knots as he walked in. When he came out an hour later, his eyes were red, but he was smiling. "He's trying," he said, pulling me into a hug. "He's not there yet, but he's trying. He asked about you, said he wants to meet you properly." It wasn't a fairy tale ending, but it was a start. We drove back to Brooklyn, the city lights blurring past, and I felt a weight lift, not completely, but enough to breathe easier. Ethan was finding his way, and I was right there with him. That night, as we lay in bed, his arm around me, he said, "I used to think love was supposed to be easy. But it's worth it. You're worth it." I turned to him, my heart full. "So are you," I said, and I meant it. Our story wasn't over. There would be more hard days, more fights, more moments of doubt. But there would also be mornings waking up together, nights laughing over nothing, and the quiet certainty that we were in this together. We'd shared a bed, a kiss, a life, and through it all, we'd found something worth fighting for, each other. In the end, it wasn't about the world accepting us. It was about us accepting ourselves, choosing love over fear, and building a future one moment at a time. And as I felt Ethan's warmth beside me, his breath steady in the dark, I knew we'd make it. Together.